Good afternoon, everyone. How y'all doing? It's like that time of the afternoon where everyone's blood sugar is running low, so let's try that again. How is everyone doing today? Awesome. It's great to be here. Thank you, mHUB, for having all of us. Just really quick, before we get started, I did just want to take a moment. There are so many incredible events happening all at once right now, so can we just please take a moment to acknowledge and give a big thanks to the mHUB staff, volunteers, and all the workers. Team mHUB, we see you. We know how hard you're working, so thank you for delivering such a great experience. I also did just want to take 1 second to once again acknowledge and congratulate all of the winners and nominees from the Fourth Revolution Awards last night. I know a couple of them are in the room. Let's give them a round of applause, too. Great. Well, thank you so much for tuning into this conversation. My name is Joey Mack. I'm the CEO of an organization called Chicago Blend. We are a nonprofit focused on increasing diversity in Chicago's venture capital and startup community. So we do things like publish data reports. We have a highly successful fellowship program for underrepresented, overlooked candidates to get into venture capital. And most importantly, we're building a community of investors who share our commitment to diversity, equity, and inclusion, which I think are three words that have gotten twisted around in some really unsettling and grotesque ways. Just my personal opinion, and if you want more rantings on that, please come find me afterwards. However, my role today is to serve as session moderator, and I'm incredibly grateful and honored to have been asked to do that because, let me tell you, we've got a great lineup for you today. The four people to my left here are all incredible human beings who are doing and building really great things, and they're going to talk to you all today about something that I think is on all of our minds in this room, which is capital. Before we introduce each of them one by one, though, I think it'd be helpful for our panelists to know who's in the room here. So let's just do a quick audience poll. Please raise your hand if you are an entrepreneur, a startup founder, or you're thinking of starting a company. Okay, that is a lot of hands. We're in the right room. So, okay, great. Hands down. Sorry. So for all of you who just raised your hands, how many of you are actively raising capital or you're thinking about raising capital? Okay, so you're all in the right room. So do we have any investors here in the room today? Okay, we've got a couple. So hands down for everyone who put your hands down recently. These are the people that you've got to tackle after this session. And finally, any companies or organizations that provide services or support to startup companies. Okay, we've got a couple in the room, so there's a well-resourced room. So any students in the room today? Okay, a couple. The future is here, everyone. So thank you all for skipping class or spending your spring break with us. Hope you're enjoying it. All right, let's get right in and let's meet our incredible panelists. So Kristi, we'll start it off with you. I have to play time cop too. So in like 60 seconds or less, tell us a little bit about who you are and what you do, and then we'll just go right down the line.
Perfect. Kristi Dula, the Director of the Office of Entrepreneurship, Innovation, and Technology, which provides various programs, resources, and incentives for small businesses and startups out of the Illinois Department of Commerce.
Hello, on. Coco Meers, I am a serial tech entrepreneur and angel investor. I've had the great good fortune of launching a company with mHUB's very own Marcy Capron in the second row there. And I currently serve as CEO of our company Equilibria, which is a femtech company pairing progressive plant-based wellness solutions with woman-focused healthcare coaching services. Before that, I started a company called Pretty Quick, which was a marketplace for salon and spa booking. And before that, I came up in the CPG world. So not exactly hard tech, but a lot of inventory. And really delighted to be here. I have an angel investment platform also called Rebel, which seeks to invest in minority and predominantly woman-founded companies.
Hi, everyone. Annalisa Somera, a CEO and co-founder of a company called Rhaeos. I've been working with early-stage medical device companies primarily for about 2 decades, wearing many hats, VC, tech transfer, and now I lead Rhaeos. And what we do is we make this wearable diagnostic here. It's a non-invasive skin sensor where we can detect flow beneath the surface of the skin. We recently completed a 9-center pivotal study coast to coast, UCSF to Duke, and will be on market later this year. But fundraising, whether it's non-dilutive or dilutive capital, is so important. So I'm glad to be here today.
Hi, Paul Couston, second time government technology founder, also second time bringing my company through mHUB, so thanks guys. I work with the Department of Defense and municipal government. I got really good at getting Uncle Sam to finance all my crazy ideas. Got my first defense contract before I could legally drink a beer, so that's what I hang my hat on. Happy to explore a little bit more about the non-traditional route of getting funding for your venture and recognize that there's more to life than just raising venture capital.
Thank you. So, Kristi, with that, why don't we go to you to start again? Help us get a lay of the land. You've been on the operator side, on the investor side, and now you and your team at the Department of Commerce are deploying capital to early stage, high growth potential companies. So, can you talk a little bit about what are some of the most common forms of capital that are available to early stage startups in general, and also what's the state of Illinois doing to help?
Yeah, so I think everyone in the room is very familiar with venture capital, angel investing, more equity financing. There's also kind of debt financing, which is a bit more of taking money from a lender to pay it back later with interest. But non-dilutive capital can actually be really helpful, especially when we're talking grants. There are also incentives that come out of state government that are available. You want me to go into the detail? Okay, yeah. All right, so on the venture capital side, we just rolled out our $114 million venture capital fund, which is called Invent. And if you're interested in that, you can submit an expression of interest form online, and we can process through our channels. Then on the grant side, we have several opportunities. One is very new, and if ISTC or University of Illinois or anywhere in here, huge thanks to you all, because we just rolled out this week the innovation vouchers. So these are grants for businesses who are doing research in collaboration with Illinois Institutes of Higher Education. So those can be up to $75,000 grants, worth looking into if you're working with universities here. Also, the SBIR, STTR, state matching program. So this program is really to help incentivize more of the research and development that is being done at the federal level to be done in Illinois. So if you are awarded a federal SBIR, STTR grant, then you can also apply to Illinois' state program, and we could provide a matching grant up to $50,000, way less restrictions than kind of come with the federal aspect of that, which can be helpful. The federal grant support program is if businesses or organizations in the room are applying for federal grants, then you could actually apply to the Illinois side first, and we, if approved, it can provide up to $2 million in cash. That's up to a 1-to-1 match of the applicant's cash contribution. So it can be really helpful, and the purpose of that program is to help make Illinois applications at the federal level a lot more competitive. So we want to help you to win those awards, and if approved through that, then we would be able to provide a letter that goes into the federal application. So got to give us a good window, asking for at least three weeks if we can possibly get that there. And then there's the Made in Illinois manufacturing grants that we have that can help manufacturing companies who are really focused on the innovation side, and the R&D side helps with equipment purchases and so on and so forth. So there are several grants that are coming through that can be really helpful because it is non-dilutive capital. And there's incentives like the Angel Tax Credit Program, which can actually help. I love how when we're talking about these programs, like this whole panel has dove into at least one of them, but
Everyone make Kristi your very best friend. She'll save you. She'll save you in terms of the cap table, and also when you're wildly successful, your tax implications.
I love it.
And also, just to note, like, this is the state of Illinois trying to spur economic activity for tech entrepreneurs. These are free resources. Sometimes a 20-minute form is the most that they're asking for. And it can be the equivalent of you going out and raising a pre-seed or a seed round of capital right through the state as non-dilutive funding. I mean, Ascent, literally every program that you've mentioned, Ascent has applied for, right? These are resources that exist. It's just your job as the founder to go out there and pursue them.
Yeah. And even if you're looking into international trade and exporting, there's grants to help enter that world and help to grow into international markets. And government contracting, as you mentioned, can be a really, really great avenue for steady income. And I'm sure you'll cover maybe a bit more of that. But just various options to think about in addition to the traditional VC route and angel route. So that was a long list, and I want to give everyone else.
No, that's super helpful. Thank you, Kristi. So again, Illinois Department of Commerce, check them out. For our three entrepreneurs, I want to ask you all the same question. You all have such like different, unique stories to how you came to this place right now. Would love to just hear a little bit more about how you approached the whole fundraising process. How did you approach the capital, your capital stack? How did you know which forms of capital made the most sense for you at the beginning? So, Paul, why don't we start with you, and then we'll go Annalisa and then Coco.
Sure. So the good news is for all the Ascent investors out there, I made a lot of my mistakes on my first company. My first company was a pitch deck company. Now, granted, we built solar technology, but looking back, all that we really did was build a pitch deck for the next fundraise, because that's all that we were concerned about, raising venture capital. And to be quite honest, we were wildly successful at doing so early on in our careers. The problem is when you rely on venture capital to fund your business, macroeconomic changes like, I don't know, a global pandemic can stop you from raising funds. Whereas if you focus on solving a real problem for a real customer that's got real money to pay you, then you start building sustainable cash flows that you can actually grow a sustainable organization. It's kind of sad, I feel like, that we see a lot of headlines about this company just raised this much on their Series A. And as founders, it's hard not to look at that and say, oh, wow, that company's super successful because they raised a round of financing. But some of the most successful, even venture-backed companies, don't publish their revenue because they're just killing it. They're solving a problem for a customer and they're getting paid for it, and they don't need to raise venture capital. So if there's anything that you'll hear from me throughout the rest of the panel here today is I'd like to challenge that status quo about associating raising capital with running a successful organization. There's some folks on stage who have never raised capital, and they have incredibly successful organizations. So do not associate a fundraising headline with success. That is, I can tell you as someone who took their first company down that route, that is a very, very slippery slope.
Annalisa?
Sure. So I want to start off by saying that my most important job at the company is to keep the lights on, right? So I was employee number 1, built a team to about 20. We have 13 on payroll. The balance are consultants. And even before I, inked as an employee, I was looking for dollars. So the technology came out of Northwestern University at Professor John Rogers' lab. And I was like, we got to apply for a grant right now. And he's like, but you haven't signed your employment letter yet. I'm like, oh, no, I know, because I need this money. It's because it's going to take a while to come in, and we got to hit the ground running. So I was dedicated from the start to get dollars in. So at Rhaeos, we have a mix of both non-dilutive and dilutive capital. And for about 3 years, I was just dialing for dollars. And we have over 20 million raised to date, over 8 million in non-dilutive. Do I like both sources of funding? Absolutely. Why? Because I have to keep the lights on. Remember that, right? So, while non-dilutive is very attractive, right? Because you don't give up equity, but that's a lot of work. You got to keep the lights on. And, we first had a seed round on a note. We closed a Series A round, last year. Terms are obviously very important, but what we do is super expensive and have a very aggressive timeline. And I make it a point that I do that job of bringing the money in. Even though I close it, I'm still looking for money, right? Because I'm looking, for our B round, it takes a long time to, kind of date investors or even to get, non-dilutive in. So, like I said, the day after I closed my A, I was already talking to B round investors because it takes such a long time. And my team, my big team of 20, they have, all these things that they want to do and, great things. And I want to make sure that they have the resources that they need to do so we hit these milestones so that we can get, to exit. But yeah, I'm going to, keep doing my job to make sure that the money continues to flow in, because if it doesn't flow in, that's it. That's it. You got to close up.
Coco.
Yikes. Yeah, I think I couldn't agree more. It's and that trade-off. Like I think both Paul and Annalisa have surfaced two opposing realities, and they're both true, right? I mean, on the one hand, fundraising does not equal success. The exact opposite would be true. If you could grow at the growth rate that you would like to without incurring any dilution, that is what success looks like. At the same time, you got to keep the lights on. So, so I sit at the intersection of both of those things, having had, phases of profitable, unit economic positive, bottom line positive, cash flow generating growth, and that feels so good. And I just want to echo what Paul was saying. If you can do that, and you can achieve the level of growth that for you, whether that's 3x year over year or 5% year over year, whatever, for whatever strategic reason, whatever your milestone is, if you can pull off that type of accretive growth profitably, sustainably, do it. And also, when sort of the world changed, our company is as I mentioned, it's a femtech company that serves women in the fast-growing space of functional wellness with both credentialed health coaches, wellness coaches who are, people advising them on their wellness routines, as well as functional products. And so we're pairing things like cannabinoids, functional mushrooms, phytonutrient green powders. If anyone has an Athletic Greens subscription, you can cancel it. I'll replace it, for example. But you start inventory, and in this room, the capital expenditures associated with hard tech, are real. And there's only so much that lines of credit and debt instruments can get you. So our P&L was so great for so long, but we really didn't have a balance sheet. And so when we needed to go out and buy a ton of inventory to keep up with the growth, we did turn to traditional venture capital investors. Furthermore, and consumer experts, Unilever's on our cap table out of London, really great cannabis leaders here in Chicago. We've got a really great mix of consumer and cannabis investors. But there are, and that was, but there are downsides of taking on that venture capital, which is to say that, it's a marriage, right? It's not the finish line is 5 and 10 years in the future. And when you get that term sheet and you take in that first wire, that is the beginning of a very, very important relationship in your life that will likely last for many, many years. In our case, the cannabinoid tailwind has stopped. That music has stopped. And so together, when you're the most important thing to ask yourself before you take on venture capital, versus a line of credit or versus non-dilutive funding, but where you're all in it together. And make no mistake, my job is to keep the lights on, but also to make money for the cap table. I mean, I have a fiduciary responsibility to maximize return for the dollars that we have taken in. And that can be really, really tricky when the model I took in funding for a model that no longer exists. So we're reinventing together, we're trying to be really positive and optimistic, and we are pivoting together to new greener field spaces. But it would be, love you investors, but it'd be a lot more, it'd be a lot easier at this point, if I had not taken a big round that I took in 2021. So lots and lots of trade-offs. You got to keep the lights on. We needed inventory for sure. We needed growth capital. We're unit economic positive, but not always on the first transaction. And we really wanted to goose customer acquisition. So we needed it. I don't regret the decisions that we made. However, looking back, would it be easier right now if we were unencumbered from the expectations of the cap table? Of course it would. It absolutely would. So really hard to get it right. There is no getting it right.
Coco, let's stick with you because I think you're hitting on something where I wanted to go anyway, which is the relationship with your investors. Each of you has accepted capital in some form, and oftentimes when you get that check, that's really the beginning of the relationship. So can you tell us a little bit about what makes for a really successful founder-investor relationship and any cautionary tales? So why don't we go Coco, Annalisa, and then Paul.
Brief and let those smarter than me to the left go next. Real talk and knowing that you're all in the boat together. When I say it's like a marriage, like it really is. It is a contractual relationship that will last for probably a decade. You know, you hear about these like overnight successes and like they're a dime a dozen. Really, you're in this together through the good and the bad and sickness and in health. And so what makes a great relationship, I look forward to our board meetings because it's an accountability forum for me. I need to be held accountable. And Marcy, my co-founder, will keep me accountable, but so will our directors, and it's really helpful. So helpful, constructive accountability. Did I do what I said I was gonna do? And just the strategic counsel that comes from the pattern recognition of a successful portfolio. Every venture capitalist on our cap table has tons of, dozens of consumer companies that are all facing the post-iOS, 15 reality of digital marketing headwinds and omni-channel trade-offs. That's so helpful to sit in a room and talk with Unilever Ventures about like who's winning and who's not. Very few people are winning in cannabis, but when Salveo comes to me and says who is, like it's so helpful. So accountability and like, helpful, we're all in this together type of constructive ideas.
Annalisa?
So I do two things with my investors, and my colleagues are right here. The relationship is super important. So the first thing I do is do quarterly newsletters, and I keep it short and to the point, and I put the metrics in there. I've seen many examples of quarterly newsletters. If it's this long story and like lots of words, forget it. Get to the point. That's what my second VC told me is like, start up with bullets. Like, what did you do? Like, did you complete this study? Like, how much money in grants did you put in? Put in some like numbers so they can remember. And I put that in the bullets at the beginning of the email. And then I have, I have different functional areas, and I put maybe like a sentence or two in that. And the email is, short enough that it can be, read on your phone. The next thing that I do is I try to get FaceTime with my investors. That's super hard because I have investors all over the country. So I try to do, Zoom with my investors every quarter, or I fly out and see them. But I make sure my quarterly goes out first because then I'll point to it. I'll say, oh yeah, so that newsletter that you got, X, Y, and Z. And they're like, oh yeah. And then they'll like, review it. So I think it's important to, just to continue to nurture and grow that relationship because it is a relationship. They've been through a lot of things. They have, resources they can, share with you beyond dollars. And all of our investors, I'm, happy to say they're all smart money, right? So they bring a lot to the table, and several of them are, serve as mentors to me. So, I love flying out and I love seeing them. I was actually just in LA a couple weeks ago, chatting with a couple of our investors who are neurosurgeons. So, that was good. So those are the two things I do. The quarterly newsletter, I know it's like you guys have so much to do and it's hard to, put it all together. But how I kind of cheat is like when good things happen, I have this little notepad on my MacBook and I put it down there and I refer to it at the end of the, near the end of the quarter, and then I put it all together, add some pictures in there because words is like too much, right? So I add some pictures in there and that's it. And that's what they can refer to. Yep.
So a lot around accountability, good open communication, transparency. Paul, what else is missing from that one?
Yeah, so the communication is probably the biggest part. It's very much like a marriage, right? You have to be able to communicate the good, but more importantly, the bad. I've also experimented a lot. Like when we were first getting started, I thought all 12 shareholders really cared about every nuanced detail. And for the investors in Ascent here, like I do see when you open my emails, so thanks. I had very little engagement on those emails because they were too damn long. No one really cared that much except for me. So I've gotten to the similar point now where I put bullet points, and man, those get responses because people can read bullet points. And it also forces you as a founder to consolidate the information that's important. The other bit that I'll mention here too is Depending on the size of your cap table, Ascent, for better or worse, has quite a few investors. We're about 45 on the cap table now. You got to really understand the politics of how, when you have your first priced round, how preferred shares are allocated when you start getting a board, how that plays in. Granted, when you're in your first rounds of funding, it's really about that kind of impact that those investors have. But that relationship that you have with the investors is going to last you 5 to 10 years. These investors are not leaving your cap table. So it's about how you communicate, how frequently you communicate. And to be honest, I don't think there is the right answer that we can give you on the panel here today, besides experiment. Find out what works well, what doesn't work well. I know now what works well for Ascent. The other bit that I'll mention too on that communication is when you do get bad news, and trust me, Ascent has had its fair share of bad news, it's how you experiment with sharing that bad news. So I had bad news happen, and actually I called Alex Lambert because mHUB owns 5% of Ascent, and I was like, hey, Alex, how do I frame this? How do I make sure that I'm not inciting panic in my investors, but this is bad news, an expectation that we had that we didn't hit. And I told a lot of people that we would hit it. Having that kind of relationship with an investor, especially a majority investor or a big investor, is incredibly valuable because now you've practiced on someone that you're really close to. So then you can send that email blast out to the maybe 30 or 40 that you're not as close to in a way that seems very polished and prepped and doesn't incite like a panic amongst your shareholders. So just recognize that that communication part is not only the right thing to do, it's actually your obligation to do if you do bring on outside capital. And I know I just said, VC bad, but Ascent has taken quite a bit of VC money. It's a tool. And I'll tell you, there's a magical moment when you're running your business where you can make just a couple of phone calls and bring capital into the organization. When that moment happens, you know that you've built a trusting relationship with your cap table, and you know that they're supporting the mission. It took me 8 years in my career to get to that point, but man, now that I'm here, it's great to have people that believe in what you're doing, and that's what you're doing when you're bringing investors onto the cap table. You're bringing followers, mission-driven investors onto whatever you're trying to accomplish. So just keep that relationship tight.
All of you have talked a lot about what you're bringing to the relationship to nurture it, but like any good relationship, it goes two ways, right? So, Kristi, let's go to you as someone who's sitting on the investor side. What are some of the ways that investors can do serve their portfolio companies, and what sets them apart from a really great investor?
Yeah, so I think we've talked a bit about non-dilutive capital and whatnot, but the expertise oftentimes that can come from an investor when you are looking at taking VC investments or angel investments can be extremely valuable. So part of it is expertise that's brought to the table, which can lend itself to more strategic advising, kind of operational support. It depends on kind of how things are structured as to the level of involvement. But also helpful too when you've got investors who have actually gone through it themselves, been entrepreneurs and really know it because they've lived and breathed it. One specific thing that can be extremely valuable, I would say, is networks. So access to investors' networks and the willingness for that investor to help connect you into those networks, whether that be connecting you with customers that can help to drive revenue, whether that be connecting you with mentors that can help with certain issues you're tackling. It is in the investor's best interest to see your business do the best that it can, because it's better return on investment for investors, but ultimately that can help a company a lot. And then just advising on exits and helping through exits. So there's giving up part of your company for that, but I think that's also why it's very important that you, as you've said, it's like a marriage, make sure you're thinking about what someone's bringing to the table, including the check, but also aside from the check, right?
Kristi, I want to stick with you because I know there have been a lot of companies, founders throughout your career that have come to you for advice, mentorship, counsel. What is a piece of advice that you find yourself giving to founders over and over again that you want to leave with the founders in the room today?
Yeah, I would say know your business in and out when you're talking to investors, for sure. Just remain resilient through all the adversity. There is a ton of it. But thankfully, thanks to mHUB, you're seeing this huge community here where you can lean on each other and you can talk to each other about issues you're going through. Somebody else has likely gone through the same type of thing. So I would say really lean on your network, but just remain resilient.
Awesome. Entrepreneurs, founders, CEOs, you all have gotten a lot of advice throughout the course of your journeys. Some of it good, some of it maybe not so good. And we want to hear the good, the bad, and the ugly. So Annalisa, let's start with you, and then we'll go to Paul and Coco. But tell us, what is the best advice that you've had for your company, and what's the worst advice that you ignore? So Annalisa, go ahead.
I think the best advice that I've gotten when I was raising my seed round was to have thick skin. I was raising my seed round in 2020. You know what happened then? And it was so hard to get dollars in. First of all, I'm a female minority, right? Leading a medical device company, targeting a condition that many people don't know about. So I have lots of strikes against me, okay? So when I was raising my seed round, I was, zooming for dollars every single day. And I had a 2-year-old in diapers at the time, like crawling around in my home office. And I'm like, oh my God, when is this going to get better? But with each no, I got stronger, right? So I listened to that, advice, like, develop thick skin. And I'm just like, yeah, whatever. But then it made sense, over time, because each no that I got, and I got a lot of no's, that, I pivoted and I anticipated and I knew every single question that they were going to ask me. I've actually had a question and answer bank. So I was ready. I've been ready today. Anytime, like I already know the answers to the questions, sometimes before they even, finish answering it. But that thick skin, even though, we're good now with our A round and non-dilutive, but you just have to have it.
So, Paul?
The best advice I got actually was from the other voting member, Mark Ackler from Math Venture Partners. Trust is a reservoir. Every interaction that you have with an individual either contributes to that reservoir or it subtracts from that reservoir. And over time, you build up either a huge reservoir of a ton of trust that when bad news happens or you really do need a lifeline, that you almost deserve to call on that trust that you've built. But if you haven't built that trust, or every interaction that you have with that individual, you're draining that reservoir. When you really need it the most, you won't have anything left in that reservoir. The other bit of advice I'll give to founders that are currently fundraising is if you're going to the venture market and you're not getting a lot of traction, spend more time building a business in which the VCs want to invest into. Instead of doubling down on trying to raise money, you'll find a perfect equilibrium where you hit a certain amount of traction, typically top-line revenue, or at least signs of top-line revenue, letters of intent, letters of support, non-binding pre-orders. That helps prove to an investor who's giving you money in exchange for getting more money later that you have a way to make money from your customers. And if you can demonstrate that to an investor, there comes a point in equilibrium where you have enough traction to justify getting enough investment dollars. But eventually, you'll hit that point of equilibrium, and any additional effort towards fundraising is non-productive time. So recognize you want to come to the market. Me, I do every 9 to 12 months. I kind of do a pulse check and see if there's interest in potentially bringing more capital on at a higher valuation. And if there is, I spend some time pursuing it. If there isn't, I put my head back down, try not to look at my runway for a little bit, and just focus on building a business until I have something happen, something good that leads to more top line or the promise of more top line. And then I go back to those exact same investors that I wasn't getting a ton of traction. Hey, I did the thing. Are you interested? And that typically it's worked out for me so far, and I'm going to just keep doing it. So thanks.
Coco?
I feel like I'm getting such great advice from my colleagues on the panel. I'm gonna have a sticky note of all the good stuff to make my quarterly bullets easier, and I'm gonna do a 9 to 12 month pulse check. Instead of being so arbitrary about my fundraising windows. So thank you guys. Best advice I ever got was from Chuck Templeton, the founder of OpenTable, still a very active contributor to the startup ecosystem and particularly impact investing ecosystem here in Chicago, also on the West Coast. My first business was a marketplace that I exited in the beauty industry that I exited to Groupon in 2015. And Chuck said to me, "Gosh, Coco, your marketplaces are really hard. Like, this is gonna suck." I was like, "Whatever, it'll be great. I'm gonna revolutionize a $70 billion industry." He's like, no, marketplaces are really, really hard, and this is gonna suck. That's the words he used. I'm not trying to be crass. He's right. It was awful. Everything about it was awful. Building a marketplace business. That's why Marcy and I, one of the reasons that Equilibria is not a marketplace, even though we got it all right. But Chuck said to me, "You just gotta know to ride the highs a little lower and to ride the lows a little higher." So this kind of the same idea of like, just keep going, be resilient, have thick skin. Like, I think we're all saying versions of the same thing. That one stuck with me. So on days when things are going really great, I see the world in rose-colored glasses. I am a founder. I am an optimist. I'm not ashamed of that. I always will be. But I know when things are going great that something very scary is around the corner, and I try to prepare for it. For example, the massive tailwind of cannabinoid that interest and demand that our cannabis company experienced from 2019 to 2021, combined with an extraordinarily efficient marketing channel of Instagram influencers. I mean, on fire. Maybe I should have seen some of that music stopping and been a little more diversified and prepared for that earlier. Now, when things are really tough and I'm having a really bad day, I'm like a business Buddhist. I just know that things will get better. They just will. And attach a little less importance to the outcomes that I am, obviously so desperately attached to. But it's just gonna be okay. Like everybody has said, if you are getting a lot of no's, go improve your business. If you're still getting a lot of no's, go find some different investors. We are pivoting the company, and our unit economics look different now than they did 3 years ago. I went out and I raised an all-female syndicate with about 50 high net worth executive women who know how important functional wellness is for women. And we're able to write angel checks from $5,000 to $100,000. And in total, that made a lot of difference. So when you get a no, improve the business, find another party. I mean, be profitable. There's so many other solutions that you can come up with if you just don't get mired in the negativity.
Kristi, last question for you before we move into audience Q&A, but you see things at a kind of a very high level, what's happening across the ecosystem. How would you describe the fundraising environment today for startup founders? What are some of the headwinds that they can anticipate, which I'm sure many of you are already feeling, but also what are some of the bright spots that bode well for founders?
Yeah, so I would say bright spots. There's definitely a lot of interest in investing in more innovative companies. There's also a lot more rolling through on the diversified types of access to capital or diversified funding streams. So definitely be creative and be open-minded about what could work and look into different things there. As far as headwinds, I'd say sometimes economic, geopolitical landscape can influence how willing investors are to write checks at certain times. And so just try to anticipate that there might be ebbs and flows that are completely outside of your business and what's going on with the business as a whole.
That's great advice. I think we have time for one or two questions, if anyone in the audience. Sir, I saw your hand first. I think someone's going to come around with a mic. And then I see your hand over there, so we'll get you next.
Yes, thank you. Just to try to fill in a couple gaps from my own experience of things that didn't get mentioned. Some of the most difficult discussions are in valuation in the early rounds, that you really don't have much to validate your idea that is tangible, that an investor can bet on, but yet you think you have a world-changing idea. And one of the things that, in my own experience, that has worked in that situation is the idea of convertible debt. And that's a possibility. And just a couple of other comments, and I'll make it very brief. Investors have a lot of liquidity right now, and so they need you as much as you need them. And going to them with confidence can make a really big difference. And then the final point that I want to make is that there are hundreds of venture funds out there, and they all have filters that you don't know about when you first talk to them. Some won't work, some work only in certain markets, some only work with certain technologies, some will only invest with a certain bite size, some will not lead rounds, they want to be followers, others want, and I could go on with 20 or 30 different ones. And it's important early on when you're talking to them that you figure out whether you're even a candidate for them. And that is typically not very obvious. There's nowhere you can go to find that out. And I think that also gets to the thick skin issue, which is that a lot of times the no is because you just don't fit, and don't take it personally. Thank you.
Thank you for sharing.
Anyone want to respond? Or
Well, I'll just say one thing thank you very much. On the first point about valuation, to founders in the room, especially in the earlier days, like I used to care a lot. Like Marcy and I just would like go back and forth and talk about it a lot. What were we comfortable with? What were we not? Obviously, don't sell more of your company than you like really can stomach. But guess what? Nothing is more fun than making people lots of money. It feels really good. It is a win. And so like really like try not to sweat it. Because if you take a few $1 million off there, but make it up later, like that feels good for everybody. One of my favorite professors in business school used to say, like, everybody at the party needs to have fun. Like everybody's gonna have fun if you're willing to give a little in the first bit, and then together you guys like crush it, and your multiple's so much higher either at exit or at the next round than anybody thought. Like that's just a good day. It's not a bad day.
I think we had one more question right over here in the middle. Sarah, raise your hand so we can find you. Okay, right over there.
Okay, anyone hear me? Perfect. So I know you guys have all kind of talked individually about building those investor networks, for the variety of resources that come with it. Regardless of, places like mHUB, universities, grants, when we're talking about individual investor networks, what, in your words, is the best way to start building those individual investor networks?
Who wants to take that?
Sorry, they took. So I guess I looked towards the University of Illinois personally. Right, I was a student when I first got started, and early on, especially when you're a student, everybody wants to give advice to a student. Right, everyone wants to teach a student. So I would ask for a ton of advice, and a lot of those mentors and advisors, and I called them mentors and advisors, eventually became check writers for me in my career. So I think the most important thing to recognize, and back to that trust reservoir, it's about long-term relationships. If you make your investors a ton of money on your first venture, they're gonna support you on the second venture. Which is the question about valuation. That's where it's like you kind of have to just take a quick, that seems about right. Let's focus on closing the round and getting back to building a business. I can tell you firsthand, I've wasted months of time going back on valuation that ultimately maybe changed the course of 1 or 2%. It's not worth the amount of time, and especially when you start growing to about 28 full time, the burn rate that you're spending negotiating 1 or 2 percentage points. So ultimately, look towards your mentors and your advisors and make them feel great about giving that advice and that mentorship. And eventually, you'll build enough trust to the point that they're opening up more than just their calendar for you, right?
Awesome. We'll have to leave it there. Paul Couston, Annalisa Somera, Coco, Meers, Kristi, Dula, thank you so much for doing this. Let's give them a round of applause.